Non-profit organisations in South Africa depend on financial government funding to continue their community services in protecting and caring for the most vulnerable, including survivors of gender-based violence and substance abuse rehabilitation. But this is not always achieved, as many NPOs are at risk of closing down due to financial challenges that, of course, are now exacerbated by budget cuts. Tabling a budget vote recently, the Minister of Social Development, Nokuzola Tolashe, said as mandated by regulations, they will commence with the deregistration of non-compliant NPOs, and further briefings on this will be held to advise on the details on how the phased-in approach will be managed. To get an update on the status of NPOs and the support given by the Department of Social Development, we are joined by Neliswa Cekiso, who is Director of Child Protection at the Department of Social Development. It's a pleasure to have you, and we do thank you very, very much for coming on, particularly after yesterday's broadcast, where a lot was spoken about, and of course a very emotive issue. It certainly is, that got a lot of people speaking. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Liana, and good morning to the SABC2 viewers. So thank you for having us.
It's an absolute pleasure. And I think one of the important things is to start off with perhaps asking you for your views on this, and perhaps numbers. What is the total number of children, or are the total number of children that need services in youth care centres? And what is the figure of those that are already receiving care for various challenges? Because this is a right of reply. Yesterday we were given figures. The department has disputed those figures. So perhaps you're able to give us from your side what it is that you say they are.
Thank you very much, Eliana. I need to indicate that, yes, as the country, we are confronted by the scourge of violence against children. Just to give you a picture on what I am referring to, the reported cases that we get through our National Child Protection Register, where people report on violence against children, just for 2023-24 financial year, we had about 23,000 plus children that were reported to have been abused. And when we speak about this abuse, that does not translate to removal into alternative care. In this case, alternative care would be your temporarily safe care, your child and youth care centers, including foster care placements. And just again to share with you that when the 2.8 million was reflected on the scrollers, as I was watching the news yesterday, I got very disturbed, because I thought to myself, when did we get there to the 2.8 million of children who are in need of care and protection? Because even in foster care, we've got 250,969. That was by the end of March, 2024. When it comes to placements in child and youth care centers countrywide, the children that we have, it's 14,077. And these children are placed in 395 child and youth care centers. And Liana, if I can give you a breakdown so that we know where are these facilities. Starting with Gauteng, we've got 136 CYCs in Gauteng, government-run and state-run. And the number of children that we have in Gauteng in these CYCs, it's 3,420.
Yeah.
In KZN, we've got 70 CYCs with 3,194. In Free State, we've got 49 CYCs with 1,060 children placed there. Western Cape, 46 child and youth care centers with 2,020 placed. Eastern Cape, 26 with 1,341. Mpumalanga, we've got 29 with 1,082 children placed there. Limpopo, 15 child and youth care centers with 882 children placed there. Northern Cape, 12 CYCs with 356. And lastly, Northwest with 12 CYCs and 722. And these CYCs, Liana, I must indicate that they are government and NPO run. And government, because when we render child protection services, we render this in partnership with our NGOs. And, government is really doing the best that they can to support
Okay.
these NGOs. And of course, the country confronted with the budget constraints, where even within, government services, we've got high vacancy rate because money that is allocated for welfare services, it's really not sufficient. And we keep on knocking at the door of National Treasury to say, these are the services that we must provide to children, because the level of violence against children is forcing children to be removed from home and placed into these facilities. However, Leanne, let me also indicate that we are strengthening prevention and early intervention programs,
Okay.
because we believe when we build the resilience of families, we will minimize the removal of children. Hence,
Indeed.
we've got programs.
Neliswa, and I understand that these programs are there, and it's very important. I just, in the interest of time, I'm just going to interrupt you so I can ask you a couple of questions, because they are important questions. So, can we just look at this number here? That there are approximately 2.7 million orphans in South Africa. Do you agree with those numbers?
With the number of orphans, because at times we don't really get the accurate statistics. And these orphans, Leanne, they are not necessarily placed in child and youth care centers or even in alternative care.
Yeah.
The reason for that, not all of them are children in need of care and protection. However, they are vulnerable. Hence, I spoke of the prevention and early intervention program,
Indeed.
which
But
one of
which is important, and I don't want
yes.
to play down the role of these initiatives, and I would like us to do a proper focus on that. But I think what is important is we can never downplay the severity of the situation,
Yes.
and that the number, and that's what is at dispute here, is that the department is disputing that there are that amount of children that are in desperate need of help. The NPOs, however, are saying that there are so many children and there are so many NPOs that are now facing closure because of the department's cuts. Now, this is where I think the argument is coming in, is already, just the few that I've been reading about, not only in Gauteng, this is in KwaZulu-Natal as well. It seems to be a nationwide problem where NPOs are closing their doors due to lack of funding from the department. NPOs have had to, now they are able to accommodate X amount of children, but because they're not getting the funding, they now they have to turn kids away. And come now, September, there could be a possibility that many close their doors and have to get the children out of there because they cannot pay and keep these children going. This, I think, is the problem, is that we're talking about numbers. We know the number is big, but what about the funding of these NPOs? Why have things fundamentally changed? What's gone wrong?
Liana, as we were engaging even with as SABC on the issues of funding, because National DSD is not funding the provinces. The provincial budgets are made available for social welfare services, including funding of the NPOs. So for me to really get into that space of talking on the MEC's competencies when it comes to funding of NPOs, I would really be getting into another territory.
Indeed,
Hence,
indeed.
I wanted to confine myself into, the significance of putting the issues of figures of children in need of care and protection, requiring removal and placement into CYCs or even foster care. That's why I thought it's important that I come in and also really indicate that as government, we really appreciate the role of NPOs in the provision of child protection services. But we need to make sure that we don't only focus on placement in alternative care, but we look at the broader basket of services. Hence, I was speaking about the RISIHA, where we have reached over 1.5 million children through our 1,200 drop-in centers countrywide, which is a preventative measure that we are trying to curb, the scourge of violence, building resilience of children and families. And with those drop-in centers, we are also working with the NPOs because they are run by the NPOs, supported, of course, by government, and will never really underestimate the role of the NPOs when it comes to the provision of designated child protection services.
Which is important, and it's so unfortunate that I'm not able to talk to you about the funding issues, because that is at the heart of all of this. Because, there's even figures that basically state that, the number is around 500 million that was unspent from many, well, this is just Gauteng, from the Department of Social Development. And again, please, I urge you to correct us if we're getting these numbers wrong, but these are out and about in different publications saying that 500 million in unspent funds from just Gauteng was sent back to the Treasury last year, when we're seeing NPOs closing down. There is a list of NPOs that are closing down, and it is a great worry because yes, we get the department on to correct the numbers, but at the end of the day, it's not just about the numbers. The reality on the ground, and we saw the reality on the ground yesterday, is that people are struggling. There are children that are living there, they have nothing, and it is these NPOs that are stepping in and helping. Obviously, there are unscrupulous NGOs out there that are trying to operate, and they are illegal, but there are certain ones that are legal and yet are still not being funded. Is there, perhaps you can talk to us about this process of closing these NPOs down? Who qualify, who don't? We know that there's a list of adjudicators that are now determining who gets to stay and who gets to go. Do you know about this process and how it works?
When we engage with provinces, we hear that there are processes that they are embarking on in terms of assessing the business plans, because the funding is also based on what is put on the business plans by the NPOs. And as I've indicated again, this is really a provincial competency, and it requires that as national and provinces, we really have, a roundtable discussion to see how best we can approach the issues of funding of NPOs under the fiscal constraints that we are confronted with as the country.
Yeah, and I think it's very important because, as I was embarking on sort of doing more research and reading about this, I was reading about some of these houses that, had to close down, these safe spaces, and they've had to separate children, and whether they be siblings have been sent apart, and, these are disastrous circumstances for the children of this country. If there is a legitimate NPO that is working well, surely we should do everything to protect them. And that is what I think we're trying to say, is we need to protect these children as opposed to, put them in. Obviously, foster care is a wonderful way, but the problem is that doesn't always work out. And we're well aware of this. But I think we do need to broaden this and, as you say, have a round table and perhaps have more people that can come and add their voices to this conversation from the department, that can talk about funding, that can talk about the NPOs, why they're closing down, and the funding as well. But we thank you for coming on just to at least give us the numbers that we sort of had spoken to yesterday. Neliswa, thank you. Thanks very much for your time. Neliswa Cekiso is a Director of Child Protection at the Department of Social Development. I still think we need a lot more on this conversation because not too much coming from that, unfortunately. We need to speak numbers, we need to speak figures, and we need to speak to those that have actually closed their doors and the criteria the department is looking at as to why they've stopped funding and perhaps what they're looking for from these different NPOs to keep on operating.